Rushing to work on a rainy Seattle morning, I accidentally took my husband's phone. As soon as I found a seat on the crowded city bus, his sister called, and the very first thing she screamed through the speaker left me entirely speechless. Did you wire the $150,000 from the joint account yet? Because tomorrow is the closing day for the house and Tasha is having a total meltdown. Please do not tell me your clueless wife is starting to ask questions. My name is Naomi. I am 32 years old and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. As a successful forensic accountant, I thought I had escaped their toxicity, but I married right into another version of it. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family who underestimated your worth. Growing up in a household where emotional coldness permeated every corner taught me to be observant. My childhood was a fortress of expectations I could never quite meet, but it forged my analytical mind. I maintained perfect grades and joined honor societies to survive. That same survival instinct is what kept my hands from shaking as I sat on that swaying city bus, holding the phone that was about to destroy my marriage. The morning had started like any other Tuesday. Terrence, my husband of 4 years, was practicing his upcoming Sunday sermon in the mirror. He is the assistant pastor and the community charity director at one of the most prominent Black churches in Seattle. He always knew exactly how to project that flawless image of a devoted man of God. He wore his tailored suits with an air of absolute righteousness, and the congregation adored him. They looked at us as the ultimate example of modern Black excellence. I was the high-earning financial professional, and he was the charismatic spiritual leader dedicated to uplifting the community. We were the couple everyone pointed to during marriage retreats. That morning, he kissed my forehead, poured my coffee into my travel mug, and told me he was incredibly proud of how hard I worked for our future. I grabbed what I thought was my phone off the kitchen island and rushed out the door to catch the express bus downtown. We had the exact same model of phone with the exact same matte black case. It was an easy mistake to make. I did not realize what I had done until I settled into seat 12B and tried to open my email. The lock screen background was not my carefully organized calendar widget. It was a picture of Terrence standing at the church pulpit. Before I could even process the frustration of having to commute all the way back home to swap devices, the screen lit up with an incoming call. The caller ID flashed with a picture of Dominique. Dominique is Terrence's younger sister, and she has always been fiercely judgmental. She carried herself with an inflated sense of superiority, constantly dropping hints about how a woman should serve her husband. She made it her personal mission to scrutinize my every move, usually offering unsolicited advice about how my demanding career was unnatural for a church leader's wife. I figured she was calling Terrence to complain about some minor inconvenience regarding the church choir or to ask for money. Wanting to let her know I had his phone so she would not worry when he did not text back, I swiped to answer and brought the device to my ear. I did not even have the chance to say hello. Dominique did not wait for a greeting. Her voice blasted through the earpiece, frantic and loud. Did you wire the $150,000 from the joint account yet? Because tomorrow is the closing day for the house, and Tasha is having a total meltdown. Please do not tell me your clueless wife is starting to ask questions. The air in my lungs simply vanished. The rumbling engine of the bus, the chatter of the other passengers, the rain hitting the window. Everything faded into a muted hum. My blood ran completely cold, but I did not cry. I did not gasp. I sat perfectly still as the sheer magnitude of those numbers processed in my brain. $150,000. That was not just some random amount of money tucked away in a standard savings account. That exact figure was the life insurance payout from my recently deceased father. My father and I had a complicated relationship, but when he passed away 6 months ago, he left that money to me. Terrence had convinced me to park those funds in a high-yield joint account we opened specifically for future investments. He told me we should let it grow untouched until we were ready to buy a commercial property for his community charity. And then there was the name, Tasha. Tasha was not just a random woman. She was Dominique's best friend. They were line sisters in their college sorority, always taking pictures together, throwing up their signs, and wearing their colors at every social event. Tasha was always hovering around family gatherings, acting overly familiar, and flashing these knowing smiles that I had previously brushed off as just her being socially aggressive. Hearing Dominique scream her name in connection to my father's life insurance money and a house closing was like a physical blow to my chest. They were buying a house. My husband was buying a house for his sister's best friend using the money my dead father left me. "Hello. Are you there, Terrence? You need to handle this right now," Dominique yelled into the phone, her voice dripping with irritation. She thought she was talking to her brother, plotting the ultimate theft right behind my back. I did not say a single word. I slowly pulled the phone away from my ear and tapped the red button to end the call. A normal person might have completely broken down right then and there. A normal wife might have screamed, thrown the phone across the bus, or immediately called her husband to demand an explanation through hysterical tears. But I am not a normal person. I am a forensic accountant. My entire career is built on tracking missing money, uncovering hidden assets, and dismantling financial fraud. I spend my days tearing apart the lives of white-collar criminals who think they are smarter than the paper trail they leave behind. The moment I ended that call, the betrayed wife inside me stepped aside and the professional auditor took over. I looked down at the dark screen of Terrence's phone. My hands were perfectly steady. The emotional trauma was safely locked away in a box at the back of my mind reserved for a later time. Right now, I had a job to do. I had to secure the evidence. The hunt began immediately on seat 12B of the city bus. I knew I had a limited window of time before Terrence realized his phone was missing and panicked. I needed to get inside his digital life and extract every single piece of data before he had the chance to wipe it remotely. I was going to find out exactly how deep this betrayal went, and I was going to use his own arrogance to destroy him. The first obstacle was bypassing his passcode. Terrence changed his passcode every few months, claiming it was a necessary security protocol because he handled sensitive pastoral care emails for the congregation. He always told me that privacy was crucial for his ministry. I used to respect that boundary, believing it was a sign of his dedication to his flock. Now I knew it was the shield he used to protect his double life. But Terrence, for all his charming manipulation, was fundamentally arrogant and predictable. People who believe they are untouchable always leave a back door open. I thought about the numbers that mattered most to his inflated ego. I tried his ordination date. Incorrect. I tried the date he was appointed as the charity director. Incorrect. Then I thought about the culture he worshipped, the image of brotherhood and legacy he constantly projected. I typed in the founding year of his college fraternity followed by his line number. The lock screen vanished and the home screen opened up before me. I immediately navigated to his text messages. I did not waste time looking through his casual conversations with church elders or his generic exchanges with our mutual friends. I went straight to the search bar and typed in Tasha. Dozens of threads popped up, but one active group chat caught my eye immediately. The chat was titled The Real Family. The members of this group were Terrence, Dominique, and Brenda. Brenda is my mother-in-law. She is a woman who wears massive hats on Sunday mornings, sits in the front pew, and loudly praises the Lord for her perfect son. She has always treated me with a polite but icy distance wrapped in passive-aggressive compliments. I opened the Real Family group chat and began to scroll. What I read was a masterclass in psychological manipulation and cruelty. The messages dated back over 2 years. I read layers upon layers of venom directed at me. There were messages from Brenda mocking my grueling work hours. She had sent a text just last week stating if Naomi was a proper submissive wife instead of playing with numbers all day, Terrence would not need to find comfort in Tasha's arms. A man needs a warm home, not a financial statement. Dominique had replied with laughing emojis, adding Tasha knows how to treat a king. Naomi just knows how to pay the bills. Let her keep working those overtime shifts so my brother can finally live the life he deserves. The betrayal was so thick it practically suffocated me. My own mother-in-law, the woman who prayed over our dinner table, who hugged me and called me daughter, was actively orchestrating my husband's affair. She was encouraging him to use me as a financial stepping stone while validating his infidelity as some sort of divine right. But the ultimate gut punch came as I scrolled further back into the photo attachments within the chat. I found pictures from the famous Sunday family cookouts hosted at Brenda's house. These cookouts were a staple in their family tradition. Every other Sunday, Brenda would host massive gatherings in her backyard with ribs, brisket music, and the entire extended family. I was frequently too busy working to attend. Terrence would always go alone, bringing plates of food back for me and kissing my cheek, saying everyone missed me but understood that my career was providing for our future charity goals. He made me feel like my absence was a noble sacrifice for the greater good of our family legacy. The pictures in the chat revealed the agonizing truth. These cookouts were not innocent family gatherings, they were elaborate cover-ups. I clicked on a photo from a cookout last month, the same weekend I had worked 48 hours straight to finalize a massive corporate audit. The picture showed Terrence standing at the grill holding a pair of tongs with his arm wrapped tightly around Tasha's waist. Tasha was wearing a sundress, laughing, throwing her head back. On the other side of them stood Brenda and Dominique holding plastic cups, smiling brightly for the camera. The caption under the photo sent by Brenda read, "My beautiful family together on a blessed Sunday. Love, my real daughter-in-law, Tasha." They were actively hosting Tasha, allowing Terrence and his mistress to play house right under the family's roof. They were introducing her to cousins and aunts and uncles as his partner, while I was sitting in a quiet office, staring at spreadsheets to fund the very life they were enjoying. My husband was living an entirely separate existence with the full blessing and logistical support of his mother and sister. Every time I apologized for missing a family event, every time I transferred money to help Brenda with her mortgage, every time I bought Dominique a birthday gift, they were laughing at me. I was funding the entire operation. I took a deep, steady breath. The bus hit a pothole, jostling the passengers, but I remained anchored to my seat, my eyes locked on the glowing screen. I did not feel sorrow anymore. The sadness had been instantly incinerated by a cold, calculating rage. I opened my secure encrypted cloud storage app on the phone, a program I used for securely backing up financial evidence during my audits. I began exporting everything. I forwarded the entire chat history, the photos, the timestamped logs, and the voice memos Dominique had sent, detailing the house closing. I dug into his email app and found the correspondence with the real estate agent, confirming that the $150,000 was meant for a down payment on a luxury townhouse in Tasha's name. I mirrored his banking apps documenting the exact routing numbers they planned to use. I worked with the precision of a surgeon extracting a tumor. I knew that confrontation without leverage is just noise. If I simply yelled at Terrence, he would gaslight me. He would use his pastoral charm to twist the narrative, calling me paranoid or claiming the money was for a legitimate church investment. Brenda would rally the congregation against me, labeling me a crazy, jealous woman trying to ruin a man of God. Dominique would use her social circles to drag my name through the mud. I needed an airtight, impenetrable vault of evidence. I needed receipts that could stand up in a federal court. By the time the bus pulled into my downtown stop, I had successfully uploaded 4 gigabytes of raw, unadulterated truth to a server that only I possessed the keys to. I slid Terrence's phone back into my bag, stepping off the bus into the gray Seattle drizzle. I adjusted my coat, blending perfectly into the crowd of morning commuters. To anyone looking, I was just another professional heading to the office. They had no idea they had just handed a loaded weapon to the one woman who knew exactly how to dismantle their entire world dollar by dollar. Stepping off the crowded city bus, the cool Seattle morning air hit my face and instantly grounded me. I adjusted the strap of my leather tote bag against my shoulder and joined the fast-paced stream of downtown commuters. My steps were measured and precise, perfectly matching the rhythm of the bustling financial district around me. On the outside, I looked like any other dedicated professional heading into another demanding day of corporate audits and financial reviews. Nobody passing by me on the damp pavement could possibly know that my entire personal world had just been violently upended. The devastating revelations I had just uncovered on the bus were safely locked away in the darkest corners of my mind. Forensic accounting requires a unique type of mental compartmentalization. You cannot let the raw shock of financial betrayal cloud your analytical judgment. You must remain entirely detached, observing the numbers and the lies with clinical precision. I was applying that exact same professional discipline to my marriage right now. The towering glass facade of my firm gleamed under the gray overcast sky. I walked through the revolving doors and offered a polite nod to the security guards at the front desk. My badge scanned with a sharp beep, and I stepped into the elevator, pressing the button for the 42nd floor. The smooth ascent gave me exactly 45 seconds to completely erase any lingering trace of the betrayed wife I had been just half an hour ago. When the elevator doors slid open, I stepped onto the polished marble floors of our executive suite, projecting nothing but absolute calm and unshakable authority. I greeted the receptionists by name, asked about their weekends, and walked directly to my corner office. Closing my heavy glass door, I immediately pulled Terrence's phone from my bag. The screen remained dark. The massive data transfer I had initiated on the bus had completed flawlessly, sending 4 gigabytes of his most heavily guarded secrets, text messages, hidden photo albums, and offshore routing numbers directly to my secure encrypted cloud server. I took a microfiber cloth from my desk drawer and carefully wiped down the matte black case and the glass screen, erasing any physical trace of my fingerprints. I placed the phone gently on the corner of my mahogany desk, adjusting it so it looked like an innocent afterthought. I arranged my dual monitors, organized my notepads, and sat back in my ergonomic leather chair. I checked my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city skyline. My tailored navy suit was immaculate. My hair remained perfectly pinned back. My expression was an impenetrable mask of serene professionalism. The stage was set and the trap was primed. I knew my husband better than he knew himself. I knew exactly how long it would take for his massive ego to crack under the pressure of a missing digital lifeline. I did not have to wait long. Less than 20 minutes later, a sudden commotion erupted outside my office. Through the frosted glass walls, I saw the familiar tall silhouette of my husband. Terrence was moving through the corporate bullpen with his signature pastoral charm. He was flashing his brilliant, practiced smiles at my junior analysts and offering warm, charismatic greetings to everyone he passed. He played the role of the devoted, supportive community leader to absolute perfection. But my highly trained eyes caught the rigid tension locking his broad shoulders. He was moving entirely too fast. His strides were long and forcefully hurried. He practically shoved my heavy glass door open before knocking quickly and stepping inside. Terrence stood in my office holding 2 large iced coffees from the artisanal cafe located 3 blocks down the street. It was my exact complicated order, an iced latte with oat milk and a half pump of sugar-free vanilla. It was a calculated peace offering wrapped in clear plastic and dripping with condensation. Despite the crisp morning weather, outside a highly visible sheen of nervous sweat coated his forehead. He was breathing heavily, as if he had sprinted the entire way from his church office building. He forced a wide, booming laugh that bounced aggressively off the acoustic panels of my office walls. The sound was entirely too loud and terribly out of place for a quiet financial firm at 9 in the morning. "Babe, you absolutely scared me half to death," he announced, stepping forward to place the sweating plastic cups on my pristine desk. I realized I did not have my phone right as I pulled into the church parking lot. "You accidentally took my phone when you rushed out this morning. I was so worried you would not be able to reach me today." I sat perfectly still and simply watched him perform. He was a master manipulator accustomed to swaying massive congregations with his dynamic voice and commanding emotional presence. But here in my office, under the harsh fluorescent lights, his performance felt incredibly cheap and completely transparent. I noticed the subtle, pathetic tremble in his left hand as he set the coffee down. I saw his dark eyes immediately dart to his phone resting innocently on the edge of my desk. He stared at the dark screen with a desperate, hungry intensity, needing to know if the digital lock had been breached. His entire future, his pristine community reputation, and his luxury lifestyle with Tasha depended entirely on whether or not I had swiped my finger across that glass surface. I let the heavy silence stretch for exactly 4 seconds. In a fraud interrogation, silence is the absolute ultimate weapon. It forces the guilty party to panic and fill the uncomfortable void with more unnecessary lies. Terrence shifted his weight awkwardly, adjusting the lapels of his expensive custom-tailored suit. He chuckled again, a dry, nervous sound scraping the back of his throat. "It is crazy how much our phones look alike, right?" he babbled, pointing a shaky finger at the devices. "Same matte black case and everything. I practically tore the entire house apart looking for it before I checked the tracking application on my tablet. I saw it moving downtown and figured out exactly what happened. You really had me panicked, baby." He was fishing blindly in the dark. He desperately needed me to speak. He needed to gauge my emotional state to determine his next move. If I was angry and shouting, he would know I saw the messages from Dominique. If I was crying and hysterical, he would know I found the hidden photos of him and Tasha at his mother's house. I gave him absolutely neither. I leaned forward in my chair, resting my elbows on the desk, and let a soft, affectionate smile spread across my face. I effortlessly channeled the devoted, supportive wife he firmly believed me to be. The clueless woman who worked 80-hour weeks to fund his entire lavish existence without ever asking a single question. "I found it in my bag right when I got off the bus," I said, my voice smooth and melodic, conveying nothing but genuine, mild amusement. I reached out, picked up the device, and handed it back to him. My hand was perfectly steady without a single tremor. "I am so sorry, honey. I was rushing to beat the traffic and just grabbed the first black phone I saw sitting on the kitchen island. I did not even realize my mistake until I tried to check my morning emails and the screen would not open for me. I did not even know the passcode, so I just left it off and put it away in my bag. I figured you would track it down eventually and come rescue it." The transformation in Terrence was instantaneous and almost comical to witness. The rigid, terrified panic gripping his chest completely evaporated into thin air. He let out a massive, exaggerated exhale, the loud sound of a man who firmly believed he had just dodged a lethal bullet. The nervous sweat on his forehead seemed to dry up instantly. His posture relaxed immediately, returning to the arrogant swagger of the untouchable community leader he pretended to be. His ego was so massive and so consuming that he never even considered the possibility that I could easily outsmart him. He truly believed I was nothing more than a naive calculator, a human automated teller machine, blinded completely by his pastoral charisma and fake devotion. "Thank God," he breathed out, sliding the phone eagerly into his breast pocket. He practically patted the pocket to ensure his precious secrets were safe. He walked around my desk and leaned down, pressing a lingering kiss to my forehead. His lips felt like sandpaper against my skin, and a wave of pure revulsion washed through my body, but I did not flinch. I let him play the loving husband. I let him maintain his pathetic illusion of control. "You work too hard, my beautiful wife," he murmured, stroking my shoulder with fake affection. "I just wanted to make sure my queen had her favorite coffee to get through the morning. I will see you at home tonight. We can order some sushi and just relax together." "That sounds perfect," I replied, maintaining direct eye contact with a sweet smile. "Have a wonderful day at the church, Terrence. Tell your mother and Dominique I said hello." He smiled brightly, completely missing the lethal undertone hidden within my words. "I will, babe. Love you." He turned around and walked out of my office, his stride newly confident and completely relaxed. He stopped at the reception desk to charm the administrative assistants for another minute, flashing his brilliant white smile before finally stepping into the elevator. I watched the heavy metal doors slide close behind him. The very moment he was completely out of sight, I dropped the affectionate smile. My face returned to a cold, calculating mask. I stood up, picked up the iced coffee he had brought me, walked over to the corner trash can and dropped it straight in without a second thought. I returned to my desk and woke up my dual monitors. I logged into my secure cloud server, navigating smoothly through multiple complex layers of encryption. The folder labeled Terrence Evidence sat there waiting for me. He walked out of my office thinking he was the smartest man in the entire city of Seattle. He was completely unaware that in the 30 minutes prior I had successfully mirrored his entire hard drive text history and hidden photo albums directly to my secure server. He had absolutely no idea that his reign as the community king was already over. He had no clue that the financial empire he built on my back was about to crash down on his head and bury him. I cracked my knuckles, opened a blank spreadsheet, and began to meticulously trace the dirty money, preparing to dismantle his life piece by piece. The encrypted folder on my secondary monitor held the entirety of my husband's secret life. I opened the main directory and was greeted by a labyrinth of subfolders labeled with vague titles like Project Alpha and Development Funds. For a man who preached about living in the light, Terrence preferred operating in the darkest digital shadows. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, executing standard forensic sorting algorithms to categorize his files by date and financial significance. I bypassed his personal emails and navigated into the accounting spreadsheets he thought he had hidden behind a dual authentication firewall. The initial shock of the affair was completely gone. I was now operating entirely on the cold, hard adrenaline of a professional auditor finding the thread of a massive corporate fraud. Every click of my mouse peeled back another layer of the pristine image Terrence had constructed over the last 4 years. I pulled up the primary ledger for the Community Uplift charity. This organization was the crown jewel of Terrence's public persona. It was deeply respected throughout our African American community and celebrated within our church network. The charity was ostensibly designed to provide financial literacy workshops and affordable housing grants for underprivileged youth in Seattle. Terrence was the visionary director, delivering powerful speeches about Black excellence and building generational wealth. He was profiled in local magazines as a modern pillar of the community. What the magazines did not know was that the charity only existed because I personally backed the foundational loan. When Terrence first pitched the idea, they lacked the capital to launch. I used my impeccable credit score and substantial savings as collateral to secure the $500,000 commercial loan that got the Community Uplift charity off the ground. I had believed in his vision. I had believed in him. Now I stared at the main operating account and watched my belief shatter into 1,000 jagged pieces. The financial footprints left in the mirrored files were astonishingly reckless. Terrence was not some brilliant criminal mastermind. He was just a greedy, arrogant man who assumed nobody would dare to look closely at the books of a beloved pastor's charity. I cross-referenced the charity's outgoing wire transfers against the church's monthly tithe deposits. The discrepancy was glaring. I found a complex web of shell companies disguised as outreach vendors. There was a youth counseling service receiving $10,000 a month but had no physical address or registered employees. There was an event planning company billing exorbitant fees for services never rendered. I ran a quick trace on the tax identification numbers associated with these phantom vendors. They all routed back to a single holding account registered under Terrence's name. My husband was not just a cheating spouse. He was actively embezzling massive amounts of money from the very church and charity funds working-class families sacrificed to donate. He was stealing from the community he swore to uplift. The sheer magnitude of the theft made my stomach churn, but the true horror was yet to come. I opened a payroll document labeled Administrative Overhead. I expected to see the names of legitimate part-time staff members the charity employed to manage the phones. Instead, I found 2 names that made my blood boil: Brenda and Dominique. My mother-in-law and my sister-in-law were officially listed as senior community outreach consultants. According to the ledger, Brenda was receiving a direct deposit of $6,000 on the first of every single month. Dominique was receiving $5,500 on the 15th. Neither of them had ever worked a single day for the charity. They had never organized a drive or attended a board meeting. They were on a classic ghost payroll. My husband was siphoning $11,000 of stolen charity funds every month to fund his mother's designer hat collection and his sister's luxury lifestyle. I sat back in my leather chair staring at the names on the screen. The entire family was complicit in this massive fraud. Every passive-aggressive comment Brenda made about my long working hours, every time Dominique bragged about her expensive new handbags, it was all funded by dirty money. They lived like queens on embezzled church funds while mocking the woman who backed the loan making their theft possible. They felt entitled to the money because Terrence convinced them taking from the charity was just a perk of their elevated social status within the church hierarchy. The sickening reality washed over me. The Sunday cookouts, the lavish church outfits, and brand new cars were purchased with stolen community donations. The entire facade of Black excellence they paraded around Seattle was built on a rotting foundation of federal wire fraud and tax evasion. But there was still one missing piece to this horrific puzzle: the $150,000 from my father's life insurance policy. Dominique's frantic phone call on the bus had specifically mentioned wiring those funds from our joint account for a house closing tomorrow. I opened a new search window in my forensic software and typed in the exact dollar amount. The system scanned the mirrored hard drive and immediately produced a hit inside a locked folder labeled Real Estate Investments 2024. I opened the folder and found a string of emails between Terrence and a high-end real estate broker in the Bellevue area. The emails discussed the expedited closing of a luxury 3-bedroom townhouse. Terrence had presented the purchase to the broker as a strategic asset acquisition for the Community Uplift charity, claiming the property would be used as a transitional housing model for families in need. The broker had readily accepted this noble explanation, completely eager to close the lucrative commission. I downloaded the attached purchase agreement and the draft deed for the property. I scrolled past the legal jargon and the property description, scanning directly for the signatures and the listed beneficiaries. The property was indeed being purchased through the charity's holding company, but a special addendum had been attached to the final contract. The addendum explicitly transferred the deed and full ownership rights of the luxury townhouse to a private individual immediately upon closing. I looked at the printed name of the sole beneficiary and felt an icy calm wash over my entire body. Tasha Williams. Terrence was using the guise of a charity real estate investment to secretly purchase a luxury love nest for his mistress. The financial mechanics of the scheme were sickeningly clear. The charity's operating account did not have the liquid cash required to close the Bellevue property without triggering an automatic audit from the church board. So Terrence devised a bridge loan strategy. He planned to wire the $150,000 of my dead father's life insurance money from our personal joint account directly into the charity's holding account. He would use my money to close the deal and secure the deed for Tasha. Over the next 12 months, he planned to slowly reimburse our joint account using the embezzled ghost payroll funds, hoping I would be too busy to notice the temporary dip in our savings. He was literally stealing my father's legacy to buy a house for the woman he was sleeping with, and he was doing it under the protective holy banner of his community charity. The audacity was so monumental it was almost breathtaking. Terrence thought he had engineered the perfect crime. He had his mistress set up in a luxury townhouse, his mother and sister on a lucrative ghost payroll, and his beautiful, oblivious wife funding the entire operation with her pristine credit and inherited wealth. He truly believed he was untouchable, protected by his pastoral collar and his charming smile. He thought I was just a blind, submissive asset, completely content to sit in the background while he ruled his fraudulent kingdom. I carefully exported every single fraudulent payroll ledger, every fake vendor invoice, and the entire Bellevue townhouse purchase agreement. I meticulously organized the files chronologically, cross-referencing them with the corresponding banking routing numbers and federal tax codes. I was no longer just a betrayed wife, gathering evidence for a messy divorce. I was a senior forensic accountant, compiling a federal whistleblower dossier. My husband and his family had decided to play a very dangerous game of financial roulette with my life and my father's memory. I closed the spreadsheets on my monitors and locked the encrypted server. The raw data was secure. The paper trail was absolutely undeniable. They had built a spectacular house of cards using stolen money and fake righteousness. All I had to do now was figure out the absolute most devastating way to knock it all down. I sat completely still in the quiet silence of my secure office. I took one final deep, calming breath, letting the cold anticipation slowly settle into my bones. The real war was finally about to begin today. I did not march home and throw his packed suitcases onto the front lawn. I did not scream or demand a divorce. Confrontation is a luxury for the unprepared, and I am a professional. Instead, I picked up my office phone and dialed a private number I had memorized years ago. The line rang twice before a sharp voice answered. David is a ruthless, white-collar crime attorney. He is the kind of lawyer wealthy executives hire when they need someone to quietly and efficiently dismantle their opponents. 5 years ago, I uncovered a massive corporate fraud scheme that ultimately saved David's firm from a devastating liability lawsuit. He told me back then that he owed me a permanent favor. I told him I was cashing it in today. We met during my lunch hour at a discreet, dimly lit steakhouse on the edge of the financial district. I walked into the private dining room holding a secure, encrypted tablet. David was already sitting at the table, nursing a glass of sparkling water. He took one look at my face and knew this was not a social call. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I slid the tablet across the polished mahogany table and gave him the password. I watched his eyes narrow as he scrolled through the raw data. He read the chat logs from the real family group. He reviewed the ghost payroll ledgers funneling $11,000 a month to Brenda and Dominique. He examined the fraudulent charity real estate contract meant to purchase a luxury townhouse for Tasha. David has seen the worst of human greed, but even he let out a low whistle of absolute disbelief. He looked up at me and asked what exactly I wanted to do. I told him I wanted to build a titanium-clad legal and financial barrier around my assets, and I wanted to leave Terrence trapped inside his own burning house. David smiled a very cold, predatory smile and slowly opened his legal notepad. We spent the next 2 hours constructing the ultimate, inescapable trap. The very first priority was my father's life insurance money. Terrence needed that $150,000 to close on the Bellevue townhouse tomorrow. He had engineered the transfer perfectly by setting up the specific routing numbers so the cash would quietly slip from our joint high-yield account directly into the charity holding fund. He assumed I would never check the balance until the end of the month. He assumed wrong. David drafted an emergency financial injunction, citing suspected fraudulent activity. I called my private banker immediately. I instructed him to completely freeze the joint account and put a hard stop on any outbound wire transfers. The banker informed me that a wire request for $150,000 had just been queued up in the system 30 minutes ago. Terrence had actually initiated the transfer from his phone while sitting in his church office, probably feeling incredibly pleased with himself. I felt a surge of dark satisfaction as I gave the verbal authorization to kill the transaction. The funds were instantly locked down. Terrence's precious down payment was rendered completely inaccessible. The beauty of the freeze was that Terrence would not receive an automatic notification. The bank system would simply show the transaction as pending review until the closing agent tried to pull the funds tomorrow morning. By the time Terrence realized the money was not moving, Tasha would be sitting at the closing table throwing the exact meltdown Dominique had panicked about on the bus. I was effectively cutting the financial oxygen line to his secret life. I sat in that steakhouse and felt the heavy weight of my father's legacy rest securely back in my hands. Terrence thought he could use my grief to fund his infidelity, but he had critically underestimated my ability to protect what belonged to me. With my personal assets locked behind an impenetrable firewall, David and I moved to the next phase of the operation. Securing my money was merely self-defense. I wanted complete and total annihilation. I returned to my office that afternoon and spent the next 4 hours meticulously compiling a massive anonymous whistleblower packet. As a forensic accountant, I know exactly what federal regulators look for when building a criminal case. I did not just send them a simple tip. I handed them a fully investigated, wrapped, and bow-tied prosecution. I created a comprehensive timeline detailing every single dollar Terrence had embezzled from the Community Uplift charity. I highlighted the exact dates and amounts transferred to the ghost payroll accounts controlled by Brenda and Dominique. I attached the bank routing numbers, the fake vendor invoices, and the corresponding church deposit slips. I proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that the money meant for underprivileged youth was directly funding my mother-in-law's luxury lifestyle and my sister-in-law's designer wardrobe. But I did not stop there. I detailed the severe tax fraud involved in running a fake nonprofit shell game. I mapped out the entire Bellevue townhouse scheme, exposing how Terrence planned to use charity funds to purchase private real estate for his mistress. I organized the packet so beautifully that a first-year law student could easily secure a conviction. I encrypted the massive dossier and routed it through a secure virtual private network. I forwarded the entire package directly to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. I sent a duplicate file to the State Attorney General's office, specifically targeting their charity fraud division. I knew that once those federal and state agents saw the undeniable proof of wire fraud, tax evasion, and embezzlement, they would move with devastating speed. Terrence was no longer just dealing with a betrayed wife. He was about to face the full crushing weight of the United States federal government. I hit send on the encrypted emails and watched the progress bar hit 100%. The digital bombs were officially launched. Now it was simply a matter of timing. I looked at the calendar on my desk. Today was Tuesday. This upcoming Sunday was the church's highly anticipated annual community gala and outdoor cookout. It was the biggest social event of the year for our congregation. Hundreds of people would be in attendance, including prominent city officials, wealthy church donors, and respected community leaders. It was the exact platform Terrence used to showcase his flawless image of Black excellence and spiritual leadership. I knew exactly what he was planning to do this weekend. He had been bragging about it for weeks. He planned to stand up in front of the entire congregation and make a major announcement regarding the charity's new real estate investment program. He planned to proudly present the Bellevue townhouse as a tremendous victory for the community, completely unaware that I had already killed the funding and handed his fraudulent blueprints over to federal investigators. I knew Brenda and Dominique would be sitting in the front row, wearing their finest expensive outfits, bought with stolen money, basking in the glow of their fake prestige. I knew Tasha would be somewhere in the crowd waiting to celebrate her new luxury home. They were all going to be gathered in one place feeling absolutely invincible. They expected me to sit quietly by Terrence's side, playing the dutiful, supportive wife, while they actively mocked me behind my back. They wanted a show. I decided I was going to give them the performance of a lifetime. Over the next 4 days, I played my role flawlessly. I went home every evening and cooked dinner. I asked Terrence how his day went and listened intently as he lied to my face with remarkable ease. I smiled when Brenda called to remind me about the Sunday dress code. I calmly agreed when Dominique sent me a passive-aggressive text demanding I bring a specific dessert to the cookout. I swallowed my disgust every time Terrence kissed me, holding on to the cold, comforting knowledge that his entire world was resting on a tripwire that I controlled. I carefully prepared my tablet, ensuring all the evidence was loaded and ready to be displayed. I coordinated a final strategy with David, ensuring he would be ready to step in when the chaos inevitably erupted. I packed my designer Sunday outfit carefully, choosing a tailored look that projected absolute confidence and unwavering authority. I spent Saturday night lying next to my husband, listening to his steady breathing, knowing it would be his last peaceful night of sleep for the next decade. He thought he was walking into his ultimate triumph. I knew he was walking straight into a meticulously designed slaughterhouse. The trap was set, the exits were bolted shut, and the spotlight was waiting. Sunday morning arrived, and I woke up feeling more alive than I had in years. I was absolutely ready for the church service to begin. We pulled into the sprawling parking lot of the church. The annual community gala and outdoor cookout always drew a massive crowd. Cars were lined up down the street, and the air was already thick with the smell of barbecue from the industrial smokers being set up in the back pavilion. I stepped out of the passenger side of Terrence's luxury sedan, wearing a tailored emerald green dress that projected nothing but power and absolute control. Terrence walked around the car and offered me his arm, playing the role of the devoted husband for the flock of parishioners heading toward the sanctuary doors. He waved at the church elders, flashing his bright signature smile. He looked completely relaxed. The panic from Tuesday morning had entirely vanished. He believed his secret was safe, and his financial future with his mistress was totally secured. The sanctuary was already packed by the time we walked down the center aisle. The stained glass windows cast colorful beams of light across the pews, illuminating the sea of faces eagerly waiting for the service to begin. The choir was in full swing, their voices rising in a powerful, harmonious crescendo that vibrated through the heavy wooden floorboards. Ushers in crisp, dark suits directed people to their seats, while children squirmed in their Sunday best. I kept my posture rigidly straight, my chin held high. I felt the admiring glances of the congregation. They saw the perfect power couple. They saw the loving assistant pastor and his highly successful wife. They had absolutely no idea that they were looking at a walking dead man and his executioner. I took my rightful place in the front pew directly center stage, sitting to my immediate right were my mother-in-law Brenda and my sister-in-law Dominique. They were practically holding court in the front row. Brenda wore a massive lavender hat adorned with intricate feathers and pearls perfectly matched to her tailored suit. Dominique sat beside her in a tight designer dress, her wrists heavy with gold bracelets I now knew were purchased with stolen charity funds. They both offered me the fakest, most brittle smiles imaginable as I took my seat. Brenda leaned over for a brief hollow hug, her perfume practically suffocating me. Dominique simply nodded her eyes, scanning my outfit with her usual thinly veiled disdain. I sat down smoothly and placed my designer handbag on the pew beside me. My tablet loaded with the explosive digital evidence rested securely inside the leather bag. The music swelled to a final triumphant chord, and Terrence confidently stepped up to the wooden pulpit. The congregation immediately quieted down, offering him their absolute undivided attention. He gripped the edges of the podium, looking out over the crowd with an expression of deep manufactured humility. He wore his finest charcoal suit, the one I had bought him for his birthday last year. His charismatic presence instantly filled the massive sanctuary room. He welcomed the community, thanked the elders for their service, and expertly transitioned into his highly anticipated sermon. He started slow, his voice a low, comforting rumble that slowly built in volume and intensity. He was a master orator, capable of weaving scripture and personal anecdotes into a captivating narrative that left people hanging on his every word. Today, his chosen topic was the absolute height of disgusting hypocrisy. He decided to preach about loyalty building a legacy and the sanctity of marriage. He actually had the sheer audacity to stand in front of hundreds of trusting people and speak about the divine requirement of faithfulness. He wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead with a pristine white handkerchief, leaning heavily into the microphone. A true man builds a legacy not just with brick and mortar, but with truth and unwavering loyalty to his family. He bellowed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. He spoke passionately about the sacrifices required to maintain a holy union. He warned the congregation against the temptations of the flesh and the deceitful whispers of the devil. Every single word falling from his mouth was a calculated lie. He was sweating, performing, working the crowd into a frenzy of agreeable nods and loud hallelujahs. I sat there listening to this phenomenal performance, feeling a cold, dark amusement settle deep in my chest. He was preaching about marital sanctity while actively trying to buy a luxury townhouse for his mistress, using my dead father's money. He was preaching about building a legacy of truth while embezzling thousands of dollars from the very people shouting amen from the pews. He paced across the stage, gesturing wildly, his passion seemingly entirely genuine. It was a masterclass in sociopathic deception. I maintained direct eye contact with him whenever he looked down at our pew. I did not glare or scowl. I offered him the serene, supportive smile of a deeply devoted wife. I wanted him to feel completely invincible. I wanted him to climb as high up on that pedestal as humanly possible so the impending fall would completely shatter him. About 20 minutes into the sweaty theatrical sermon, Brenda leaned over, closing the distance between us. I could smell the strong mint she was chewing. She kept her eyes focused straight ahead on her golden sun, but directed her voice entirely at me. Her whisper was a masterclass in passive-aggressive toxicity, carefully modulated so no one else in the surrounding pews could hear. It is a blessing Terence is so patient with a woman who puts spreadsheets over her family. She muttered, her tone dripping with fake religious pity. He carries such a heavy burden for this community, and he needs a wife who truly understands submission and warmth. It is a miracle he manages to stay so focused on his holy path when his own home lacks proper traditional nourishment. She adjusted her lavender hat, looking incredibly pleased with her venomous delivery. I listened to her toxic whisper while simultaneously running the numbers of her ghost payroll in my head. She was sitting in the front row of the House of God lecturing me about traditional family values while happily cashing a fraudulent $6,000 check every single month. She was judging my grueling work hours while actively using the funds I secured for the charity to subsidize her lavish lifestyle. She knew exactly where Terence was finding his supposed traditional nourishment. She had personally managed the Sunday cookout schedules to facilitate his affair with Tasha. Her absolute hypocrisy was so staggering it practically glowed in the dark. A normal woman might have defended her career or snapped back with a defensive comment about providing financial stability. But I simply let her toxic words wash right over me like water off a stone. I did not tense my shoulders. I did not break my posture. I merely turned my head slightly and offered Brenda a serene, terrifyingly calm smile. I did not say a single word in my defense. I simply reached down and casually adjusted the heavy, expensive designer watch on my left wrist. It was a subtle, deliberate movement drawing attention to the very financial success she loved to publicly mock and privately exploit. I turned my attention smoothly back to the stage, completely unbothered by her pathetic attempt to make me feel small. My absolute lack of an emotional response created an instant vacuum of tension in our shared pew. Brenda shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clearly expecting me to either shrink away in shame or bristle with quiet indignation. My silent defiance was entirely outside her normal frame of reference. Dominique, sitting just on the other side of Brenda, leaned forward slightly to gauge my reaction. I caught her eye and gave her the exact same pleasant, unreadable smile. Dominique narrowed her eyes, her brow furrowing in confusion. She knew I had intercepted her frantic phone call about the $150,000 wire transfer on Tuesday morning. She had spent the entire week waiting for the inevitable explosion, waiting for me to confront Terence or demand answers. But the explosion never came. Terence had assured her that I was completely clueless, that the phone call was just a minor misunderstanding that I had not processed. But looking at my perfectly calm demeanor, Dominique was suddenly not so sure. My absolute tranquility was deeply, deeply unnerving to her. She crossed her arms tightly over her chest, her expensive gold bracelets clinking together nervously. Up on the stage, Terence was reaching the absolute climax of his sermon. He wiped his face again, his voice dropping back down to a dramatic, raspy whisper. "Today is a glorious day for our community." He breathed into the microphone, holding the congregation in the palm of his hand. "Today, after we break bread together at our annual cookout, I have a monumental announcement to make regarding the future of the Community Uplift Charity. A vision of legacy and property that will bless this neighborhood for generations to come." The crowd erupted into loud, enthusiastic applause. The organ player hit a rising, triumphant chord to accompany the excitement. Brenda clapped enthusiastically beside me, shouting her praises. Dominique clapped too, but her eyes kept darting nervously in my direction. I joined in the applause, bringing my hands together with slow, deliberate strikes. I knew exactly what his monumental announcement was going to be. He was going to stand in front of these beautiful, trusting people and present the luxury townhouse he bought for his mistress as a community victory. He was going to use their faith as a shield for his disgusting infidelity and embezzlement. I looked down at my leather handbag resting quietly on the wooden pew. The encrypted files, the ghost payroll ledgers, the real estate documents transferring ownership directly to Tasha, they were all sitting right there waiting to be unleashed. The Internal Revenue Service and the State Attorney General were already reviewing the massive whistleblower packet I had sent them. The financial trap was fully armed, the legal guillotine was perfectly positioned, the church service was wrapping up, and the congregation was beginning to file out toward the back pavilion for the outdoor gala. I stood up from the pew, smoothing the front of my emerald dress. Brenda and Dominique stood beside me, their lavish outfits rustling in the crowded sanctuary. Terence descended the pulpit stairs, surrounded immediately by admiring church members, shaking his hand and patting his back. He looked over the heads of the crowd and found my eyes. He flashed me a bright, triumphant smile, completely blinded by his own towering ego. He truly believed he had conquered the world. He thought he possessed the perfect wife, the perfect mistress, and the perfect scam. I held his gaze and smiled back, my expression masking the absolute devastation I was about to unleash upon his life. The smell of barbecue drifted into the sanctuary, signaling the start of the afternoon festivities. I picked up my bag. It was time for the cookout to begin. The entire congregation erupted into thunderous applause. Hundreds of heads swiveled in my direction, faces beaming with genuine affection. They saw the devoted partner, the silent strength behind the great man. I handed my empty plastic cup to a nearby volunteer and began the long walk toward the stage. My emerald green dress caught the sunlight, projecting an image of immaculate grace and poise. Every step I took was measured and deliberate, perfectly matching the rhythm of the clapping hands. As I moved down the center aisle, I caught sight of Brenda and Dominique sitting prominently in the VIP section. Brenda was clapping enthusiastically, but her eyes were cold and calculating, entirely devoid of any real warmth. Dominique was filming the entire spectacle on her phone, documenting what they both believed would be their ultimate financial victory. Just a few feet away stood Tasha, her crimson silk dress standing out like a fresh bloodstain against the white linen tablecloths. She was watching me with a barely concealed smirk, fully expecting to witness my public subjugation. She thought I was walking up to that stage to hand her the keys to a luxury Bellevue townhouse. I climbed the wooden stairs to the platform, and Terence immediately pulled me into a tight, possessive embrace. He kissed the side of my head, playing the role of the deeply enamored husband to absolute perfection. The crowd cheered even louder, eating up the romantic display of marital unity. Terence kept his heavy arm wrapped firmly around my waist, turning us both to face the ocean of expectant faces. He squeezed my hip, a silent physical command to play my part and maintain the illusion. I offered the crowd a serene, brilliant smile, letting them see exactly what they wanted to see. I felt the rigid tension in Terrence's arm betraying the nervous adrenaline pulsing through his veins. For 4 incredible years, the Community Uplift charity has provided financial literacy and hope to this magnificent city, Terrence proclaimed, his voice ringing out across the pavilion. But hope requires a solid foundation. You cannot build generational wealth without owning the ground beneath your feet. We have prayed on this, we have consulted with our brilliant church elders, and we have determined that our charity must evolve. It is time for us to stop just giving advice and start providing actual, tangible shelter. The crowd murmured in enthusiastic agreement. Terence swept his free arm across the air, gesturing to the horizon. We are officially launching our community real estate investment initiative. We are purchasing properties to serve as transitional housing models, creating safe havens for families striving to get back on their feet. This is not just a dream anymore, my brothers and sisters. We have found our very first property, A beautiful, secure home that will serve as the flagship model for our new charitable mission. A chorus of loud amens and joyful shouts erupted from the back rows. They thought their donations and prayers were manifesting real change. I looked down at the elders who were nodding proudly, completely unaware that the flagship transitional housing model was actually a luxury Bellevue townhouse intended exclusively for the pastor's secret mistress. Terrence was weaponizing their faith, wrapping his massive financial fraud in the sacred cloak of community outreach. He paused, letting the applause wash over him, soaking up the adoration like a sponge. But taking this monumental leap requires tremendous faith and tremendous resources. He continued, his voice dropping to a humble, dramatic register. And God has blessed me with a partner who possesses an abundance of both. He turned to me, his dark eyes locking onto mine with terrifying intensity. The charming pastoral mask remained firmly in place, but underneath it, I could see the cold, ruthless calculation of a man closing a deal. He was banking entirely on my public submission. Maya has always been the silent engine of this charity, he declared, speaking directly into the microphone while looking straight into my eyes. She works tirelessly behind the scenes, never asking for recognition. But today, she steps into the light. Today, she is making a sacrifice that will cement our legacy in this city forever. He signaled to one of the junior deacons standing near the edge of the stage. The young man quickly stepped forward, carrying a thick, pristine leather binder. He handed it to Terence with a respectful bow and scurried back to his post. Terence held the binder up for the entire congregation to see, presenting it like a sacred text. Inside this binder is the closing authorization for our very first property, he announced, the excitement in his voice reaching a fever pitch. But this property is not being funded by your weekly tithes or our general charity donations. My beautiful wife has decided to personally fund this entire acquisition. She is releasing $150,000 from her late father's private trust to ensure this community has the resources it desperately needs. The pavilion exploded. People were cheering, whistling, and crying. The applause was absolutely deafening. I looked out into the crowd and saw Tasha practically vibrating with excitement, her hands clasped together in greedy anticipation. Brenda was wiping fake tears from her cheeks, while Dominique continued filming, securing footage of their impending payday. They had me surrounded. They had engineered a scenario where backing out would look like a massive public betrayal of the church and the community. Terence unclasped the heavy brass latch and flipped the binder open, revealing the dense legal paperwork inside. He pulled a heavy gold fountain pen from the breast pocket of his tailored suit. It was the exact pen I had gifted him when he first launched the charity. The symbolism was sickening. He pressed the open binder into my hands, the heavy weight of the paper resting against my palms. He uncapped the gold pen and held it out to me, his fingers brushing against mine. The microphone was positioned perfectly to pick up his next words, amplifying them across the entire manicured lawn. The crowd fell completely silent, hanging on the dramatic weight of the moment. Hundreds of eyes were burning into me, waiting for the triumphant signature that would launch their beloved charitable housing program. Terence leaned in close, his lips brushing against my ear. "Sign it, baby," he whispered, his voice a smooth, coercive purr perfectly amplified for the eager audience to hear. "Do it for the community. Do it for our legacy. Show them how much you love us." He pulled back slightly, leaving the gold pen suspended in the space between us. He was daring me to ruin his glorious moment. He was utilizing the immense social pressure of our entire congregation, the church elders, and our extended family to force my hand. He firmly believed I would blindly sign the authorization rather than risk a public, humiliating confrontation. He thought the heavy, suffocating weight of all those expectant, staring faces would crush my willpower and secure his stolen future. He smiled that perfect, untouchable smile, absolutely certain he had won. I looked down at the gold pen, then out at the waiting faces, letting my eyes lock onto Tasha in the front row. The rhythmic applause of hundreds of trusting parishioners washed over the wooden stage. They were clapping with genuine joy, eagerly anticipating a beautiful moment of unparalleled philanthropy. The jazz band had completely stopped playing, allowing the raw acoustic sound of the cheering congregation to fill the humid afternoon air. I stood perfectly still with the heavy leather binder resting against my left forearm, and the engraved gold fountain pen pinched between the thumb and index finger of my right hand. The smooth metal of the pen was warm against my skin, carrying the residual heat of his terribly treacherous grip. I felt the immense crushing weight of the social pressure he had so carefully engineered. He had constructed this entire elaborate spectacle specifically to box me in, relying on my desire to avoid a public scene. I did not immediately look at the legal document demanding my signature. Instead, I let my gaze sweep slowly across the manicured lawn, observing the key players in this disgusting theatrical production. I looked at Terence standing inches away from me. His broad shoulders were pulled back, his chest puffed out with manufactured righteousness. He was breathing heavily from his intensely impassioned sermon today. His dark eyes were silently commanding me to comply. His charismatic mask was perfectly affixed, but the microscopic tension around his jawline betrayed his underlying desperation. He needed this money right now. My eyes drifted past his shoulder to the VIP tables positioned directly in front of the stage. Brenda sat rigidly in her folding chair, her massive lavender hat tilting slightly as she leaned forward in hungry anticipation. She had a lace handkerchief pressed to her cheek, performing the role of the deeply moved mother-in-law. Sitting right beside her was the ever-scheming, complicit, unrepentant traitor Dominique. She was still holding her expensive smartphone up high, actively recording every single second of the event for her social media followers. She wanted digital proof of my financial surrender. And then my eyes locked onto Tasha. The mistress was practically glowing in her stolen crimson silk wrap dress. She stood at the edge of the seated crowd, unable to contain her absolute glee. Tasha was staring up at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated triumph. She genuinely believed she had won the grand prize. She thought I was nothing more than a naive, submissive obstacle waiting patiently there, waiting to be effortlessly swept aside by her superior charm. They all did. They looked at me and saw a compliant corporate wife, a living bank account entirely devoid of a spine. They expected me to break. They expected me to panic under the intense scrutiny of the community, hurriedly scrawl my name on the dotted line, and retreat into the shadows of my husband's towering public persona. A normal woman might have succumbed to the terror of the moment. A normal woman might have started crying, yelling, throwing the heavy binder at his chest, or suddenly running frantically away, running away from the stage in a fit of uncontrollable hysteria. I am not a normal woman. I am a forensic accountant. I dismantle financial illusions for a living. I survive in a world governed by cold, hard, undeniable data. I do not panic. I calculate. I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice or contort my face into a mask of rage. I maintained the exact same serene, terrifyingly calm smile I had worn all afternoon. I shifted my weight slightly, stepping right to the very edge of the raised wooden platform proudly today, where the thick green lawn met the base of the stage. I held the expensive gold fountain pen out over the precipice. I looked Terence dead in the eye, completely holding his gaze. And then I simply opened my fingers. The gold pen slipped from my grasp, tumbling through the humid air. It hit the soft grass below with a muted, dull thud, completely devoid of any dramatic flair. The tiny sound was entirely swallowed by the surrounding applause, but the visual impact was absolutely nuclear. Terence physically jolted as if struck. His confident smile instantly shattered completely right there, replaced by a look of profound, visceral confusion. His brain simply could not process the data his eyes were receiving. The script had deviated, and he had absolutely no contingency plan. He reflexively reached out his hand, hovering over the grass where the pen had fallen, as if he could somehow rewind time and force it back into my hand. Before he could recover from the sudden shock, I moved with brutal surgical precision. I reached out and snatched the microphone directly from his loosened grip. My movements were so smooth and deliberate that he did not wildly try to resist at all. He just stood there, empty-handed, his mouth hanging slightly open, a sudden sheen of panicked sweat breaking out across his forehead. The congregation, seeing the pen fall and the microphone change hands, assumed this was simply part of the planned presentation. The applause began to naturally taper off, dying down, as people leaned forward in their seats, eager to hear the devoted wife speak. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. The only sound was the distant hum of traffic from the main road and the soft rustling of the massive white catering tent fabric catching the afternoon breeze. I stood alone at the center of the stage, the microphone cool and solid in my grip. I looked out over the hundreds of expectant faces, the church elders, the innocent families, the scheming relatives, and the brazen mistress. I possessed the ultimate power in that exact moment, the power of absolute, unvarnished truth. I brought the microphone to my lips. My voice echoed across the sprawling lawn, razor-sharp, deadly calm, and perfectly modulated. It carried no hysterical emotion, no wavering pitch of a woman scorned. It was the detached, coldly clinical, and highly authoritative tone of a professional delivering an executive audit. "I would love to sign this, Terrence." I announced, my words ringing out with crystal clarity against the silent backdrop of the church grounds. But as a forensic accountant, my professional ethics prevent me from authorizing $150,000 of my dead father's money to buy a luxury love nest for your mistress Tasha. The impact of those precisely delivered spoken words was apocalyptic. A collective gasp erupted from the congregation. It was a massive, visceral intake of breath from hundreds of people, simultaneously sucking the available oxygen entirely straight out of the venue. It sounded as if a physical vacuum had suddenly materialized over the lawn. The sheer magnitude of the shock was so profound that time itself seemed to violently freeze. No one moved. No one spoke. The absolute silence that descended immediately after that gasp was deafening. It was the sound of an impenetrable facade completely detonating in real time. I stood perfectly still, letting the radioactive fallout wash over the crowd. The devastation was instantaneous and spectacularly comprehensive. I watched the shockwave ripple through the VIP section with total and complete, deeply focused, purely analytical detachment. The church elders sitting in the front row looked as if they had been physically struck by lightning. Their faces drained of color, their mouths falling open in unified horror. These were men of intense pride and rigid moral standards, and they had just been informed that their beloved charismatic pastor was actively using their sacred charity to fund a secret real estate transaction for a mistress. They turned their heads, slowly shifting their horrified stares from me to Terrence, and then finally landing directly on Tasha. Tasha's smug, arrogant grin was completely obliterated from her overly painted, pretty face. The crimson silk wrap dress suddenly looked less like a symbol of luxury and more like a glowing neon target. Her jaw dropped and her eyes widened in absolute terror. The confident mistress who had boldly taunted me just 20 minutes ago was entirely gone, replaced by a deer caught in the headlights of a speeding freight train. She instinctively took a step backward, looking around wildly as the searing judgment of the entire congregation locked onto her. Dominique's expensive smartphone slipped from her perfectly manicured fingers, hitting the folding chair with a sharp crack before quickly tumbling straight down onto the grass. She did not even attempt to retrieve it. Her mouth opened and closed in a silent, breathless panic. She knew exactly what I had just done. By explicitly naming the dollar amount and the specific purpose of the funds, I had publicly exposed the wire transfer she had frantically called about on Tuesday morning. The conspiracy was fully out in the open, and Dominique was standing right in the blast zone. Brenda looked as though she was experiencing a severe medical emergency. She clutched the lapels of her tailored suit, her face turning completely hopelessly gray. The transition from the sanctuary to the back pavilion was a seamless procession of joyous chatter and vibrant Sunday fashion. Stepping out into the crisp afternoon air, I watched the Community Uplift annual gala unfold exactly as it had for the past 4 years. The expansive church grounds had been transformed into a lavish outdoor venue. Massive white tents provided shade over rows of elegantly draped tables. Industrial smokers exhaled sweet, thick clouds of hickory wood smoke, carrying the scent of roasted barbecue across the sprawling manicured lawn. A live jazz band played softly from a raised wooden stage, setting an atmosphere of sophisticated celebration. It was a picturesque display of unity and charitable success. Every single detail was meticulously curated to project an impenetrable image of absolute perfection. I walked across the freshly cut grass, my emerald dress catching the afternoon sunlight. Parishioners greeted me with warm hugs and respectful nods, completely unaware of the explosive secrets resting securely inside my leather handbag. I navigated the crowd with practiced grace, accepting plates of catered food and offering polite compliments on the floral arrangements. Terence was already holding court near the center of the main pavilion. He was surrounded by a tight circle of wealthy donors and local politicians, shaking hands and slapping backs with aggressive pastoral charm. His booming laughter carried over the jazz music, a sound that used to make me smile, but now merely sounded like the rattling of empty tin cans. He was working the crowd, priming them for his monumental real estate announcement. I found a quiet spot near the beverage station and accepted a tall glass of iced tea with lemon. From this vantage point, I had a clear, unobstructed view of the entire lawn, including the main entrance gate. The stage was perfectly set, and the actors were hitting their marks precisely on schedule. Brenda and Dominique were circulating among the church elders, ensuring everyone noticed their expensive new hats and heavy gold jewelry. They moved with a profound sense of arrogant entitlement, firmly believing their elevated status was a divine right, rather than the direct result of federal wire fraud. I took a slow sip of my iced tea, letting the cold liquid cool the simmering anticipation in my throat. I was watching a beautifully orchestrated play and waiting for the final uninvited guest to arrive. Right on cue, a sudden ripple of hushed whispers spread near the entrance gate. I shifted my gaze and watched Tasha Williams make her grand entrance. She was not attempting to blend in or remain discreet. She walked onto the church grounds like a conquering queen demanding absolute attention. Tasha was undeniably beautiful, with long flowing hair and a bold, confident stride. But it was her outfit that immediately triggered my forensic radar. She was wearing a stunning limited edition silk wrap dress in a vibrant shade of crimson. The fabric clung to her figure perfectly, and the asymmetrical cut practically screamed high-end luxury. Dominique immediately broke away from her conversation with the church elders and rushed over to greet Tasha. The two women embraced with exaggerated enthusiasm, putting on a spectacular show of deep sisterly affection. I watched closely as Dominique linked her arm through Tasha's and proudly guided her right toward the most influential members of the congregation. Dominique beamed a brilliant fake smile and introduced Tasha in a voice loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. She presented her as a dear sorority sister and a key charity volunteer who had been instrumental in their recent community outreach programs. The elders smiled and offered warm welcomes, completely oblivious to the fact that they were shaking hands with their pastor's secret mistress. The sheer audacity of bringing Tasha to the church gala was a calculated move. It was a blatant display of disrespect designed to test boundaries and flaunt their untouchable status. Terence wanted his mistress present for his big real estate announcement. He wanted her to witness the moment he publicly declared the Bellevue townhouse a charity asset, knowing privately it was meant entirely for her. He was getting off on the thrill of the deception, hiding the truth right out in the open. Dominique was happily playing the facilitator, enabling the disrespect, because she loved the proximity to drama and power. They all thought they were so incredibly clever. I remained standing by the beverage station, my face a serene mask of calm observation. Tasha finished her introductions with the elders, and her eyes immediately began scanning the crowd. She was looking for me. I could see the hungry anticipation in her posture. She wanted a confrontation. She wanted to stand next to the oblivious wife and silently gloat over her stolen prize. When her eyes finally locked onto mine, a slow, arrogant smirk spread across her crimson-painted lips. She whispered something to Dominique, who giggled and nodded encouragingly. Tasha detached herself from the group and began walking directly across the lawn toward my position. As she closed the distance, my photographic memory effortlessly accessed the encrypted financial spreadsheets I had reviewed just a few days ago. My mind is trained to find anomalies and recognize patterns. Looking at Tasha, I did not see a romantic rival. I saw a walking breathing line item from a fraudulent bank statement. The stunning crimson silk dress she was wearing was unmistakable. It was a highly recognizable piece from a very exclusive European designer's spring collection. My brain instantly matched that specific dress to a corresponding $3,000 charge on a hidden platinum credit card statement. Terrence had made that exact purchase 3 weeks ago at a luxury boutique downtown. He had used the credit card linked to the shell company he created for his Phantom Youth Counseling service. Tasha was literally walking across the church lawn, draped in $3,000 of stolen charity money. She thought the dress made her look powerful and sophisticated. I knew it made her a material witness in possession of assets purchased with embezzled federal funds. The irony was so rich and delicious, it was almost intoxicating. She stopped a few feet away from me, striking a casual posing stance that was meant to look effortless, but clearly required significant practice. She held a plastic cup of fruit punch and offered me a smile that was entirely devoid of warmth. "Hello, Maya," she said, her voice smooth and dripping with fake politeness. "Dominique has told me so much about you. It is so wonderful to finally put a face to the name. I hear you work incredibly long hours." I did not break eye contact. I kept my posture relaxed, my hands loosely holding my glass of iced tea. "It is a pleasure to meet you, Tasha," I replied, my tone perfectly matching her artificial sweetness. "Dominique mentioned you were a key volunteer for the charity. Your dedication to the community is truly remarkable." Tasha chuckled, a soft, breathy sound that was meant to be condescending. "Oh, I do whatever I can to support Terrence's vision," she purred, intentionally using my husband's first name with a familiar, intimate inflection. "He works so hard for this church. He carries such a heavy load. He really needs people around him who understand his needs, people who can support him properly." She took a slow, deliberate sip of her punch, letting her words hang in the air between us. She was practically vibrating with the thrill of her own boldness. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice so only I could hear. "It is just such a shame," she whispered, her smirk widening into a full, arrogant grin. "Some women get so caught up in their little careers that they completely forget their duties at home. They just do not know how to keep a good man satisfied. A man like Terrence needs a woman who knows how to make him feel like a king, not an afterthought." It was the ultimate veiled insult delivered right in the middle of my church in front of my community. She expected me to react. She wanted me to flinch, to show anger, or to desperately defend my marriage. She was begging for a scene that would validate her superiority and prove that she had successfully rattled the cold corporate wife. She wanted to feel like she had already won the war. I stared back at her, completely and utterly unfazed. I did not raise my voice. I did not narrow my eyes. I simply let a long, heavy beat of silence stretch between us. I took a slow, casual sip of my iced tea, letting the ice cubes clink softly against the glass. The silence stretched further, becoming uncomfortable and suffocating. Tasha's smirk began to falter ever so slightly. The lack of a defensive reaction from me was short-circuiting her entire aggressive strategy. "You have a very beautiful dress, Tasha," I said, my voice bright and cheerful, completely ignoring her toxic insult. "That shade of crimson is absolutely stunning. It looks like it cost a small fortune. I am sure whoever bought it for you must think you are worth every single penny." Tasha blinked clearly, taken aback by the sudden compliment. She recovered quickly, adjusting the silk fabric of the wrap dress with a boastful gesture. "Thank you," she replied, her arrogance returning. "Yes, it was a very special gift from someone who truly appreciates my value." I smiled warmly, feeling the solid weight of the evidence sitting inside my bag. "I am sure he does." I agreed, nodding politely. "Enjoy the cookout, Tasha. I hear the announcements later today are going to be absolutely unforgettable." I turned away from her, smoothly ending the conversation on my terms. I walked back toward the center of the pavilion, leaving Tasha standing alone by the beverage station. She thought her little veiled comments were dealing lethal blows to my pride. She had no idea she was just digging her own grave deeper and wider with every single word. She was so blinded by her desire to win a cheating husband that she could not see the federal prison cell being built right around her. I let her keep her smug satisfaction, let her enjoy the expensive silk dress and the fake charity title. Let her believe she was the smartest woman on the lawn. The higher she elevated herself, the harder the impact would be when gravity finally took over. I glanced over at the main stage where Terrence was adjusting the microphone stand, preparing for his speech. The jazz band was winding down their final set, and the congregation was finishing their meals. The air was buzzing with happy anticipation. The stage was perfectly set. The crowd was gathered, and the spotlight was exceptionally bright. I took one last sip of my iced tea, the cold lemon flavor perfectly matching my mood. The facade was at its absolute peak. It was time to tear it down. The sharp whine of microphone feedback pierced the warm afternoon air, instantly silencing the low hum of conversation across the pavilion. Terrence stood at the center of the raised wooden platform, holding the microphone with the practiced ease of a seasoned performer. The jazz band abruptly stopped playing their final notes, fading into the sudden hush that fell over the sprawling church lawn. Hundreds of faces turned simultaneously toward the stage, drawn by the magnetic pull of his booming pastoral voice. He tapped the microphone twice, flashing that brilliant trademark smile. I remained near the beverage station, watching him command the space with effortless authority. He welcomed everyone, thanked the volunteers for the barbecue, and seamlessly transitioned into his role as the visionary community leader. He spoke about the systemic barriers to generational wealth and the divine responsibility we all shared to uplift the most vulnerable among us. His cadence was rhythmic, hypnotic, drawing the audience into a shared state of emotional resonance. The church elders nodded in solemn agreement, sitting in their reserved front row seats. Terrence was completely in his element, orchestrating the energy of the crowd like a maestro conducting a symphony. He let a pregnant pause stretch across the lawn, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow before leaning heavily into the microphone stand. "Today we are not just celebrating our past successes," he announced, his voice dropping to an intimate, resonant pitch. "Today we are stepping boldly into our future, and I cannot take that step without the woman who has been my anchor, my rock, and my greatest blessing." He extended his hand, pointing directly at me through the sea of seated guests. "Maya, my beautiful supportive wife, please come up here and join me." The entire congregation erupted into thunderous applause. Hundreds of heads swiveled in my direction, faces beaming with genuine affection. They saw the devoted partner, the silent strength behind the great man. I handed my empty plastic cup to a nearby volunteer and began the long walk toward the stage. My emerald green dress caught the sunlight, projecting an image of immaculate grace and poise. Every step I took was measured and deliberate, perfectly matching the rhythm of the clapping hands. As I moved down the center aisle, I caught sight of Brenda and Dominique sitting prominently in the VIP section. Brenda was clapping enthusiastically, but her eyes were cold and calculating, entirely devoid of any real warmth. Dominique was filming the entire spectacle on her phone, documenting what they both believed would be their ultimate financial victory. Just a few feet away stood Tasha, her crimson silk dress standing out like a fresh bloodstain against the white linen tablecloths. She was watching me with a barely concealed smirk, fully expecting to witness my public subjugation. She thought I was walking up to that stage to hand her the keys to a luxury Bellevue townhouse. I climbed the wooden stairs to the platform, and Terrence immediately pulled me into a tight, possessive embrace. He kissed the side of my head, playing the role of the deeply enamored husband to absolute perfection. The crowd cheered even louder, eating up the romantic display of marital unity. Terrence kept his heavy arm wrapped firmly around my waist, turning us both to face the ocean of expectant faces. He squeezed my hip, a silent physical command to play my part and maintain the illusion. I offered the crowd a serene, brilliant smile, letting them see exactly what they wanted to see. I felt the rigid tension in Terrence's arm betraying the nervous adrenaline pulsing through his veins. For 4 incredible years, the Community Uplift Charity has provided financial literacy and hope to this magnificent city, Terrence proclaimed, his voice ringing out across the pavilion. But hope requires a solid foundation. You cannot build generational wealth without owning the ground beneath your feet. We have prayed on this, we have consulted with our brilliant church elders, and we have determined that our charity must evolve. It is time for us to stop just giving advice and start providing actual, tangible shelter. The crowd murmured in enthusiastic agreement. Terrence swept his free arm across the air, gesturing to the horizon. We are officially launching our community real estate investment initiative. We are purchasing properties to serve as transitional housing models, creating safe havens for families striving to get back on their feet. This is not just a dream anymore, my brothers and sisters. We have found our very first property, a beautiful, secure home that will serve as the flagship model for our new charitable mission. A chorus of loud amens and joyful shouts erupted from the back rows. They thought their donations and prayers were manifesting real change. I looked down at the elders who were nodding proudly, completely unaware that the flagship transitional housing model was actually a luxury Bellevue townhouse intended exclusively for the pastor's secret mistress. Terrence was weaponizing their faith, wrapping his massive financial fraud in the sacred cloak of community outreach. He paused, letting the applause wash over him, soaking up the adoration like a sponge. But taking this monumental leap requires tremendous faith and tremendous resources. He continued, his voice dropping to a humble, dramatic register. And God has blessed me with a partner who possesses an abundance of both. He turned to me, his dark eyes locking onto mine with terrifying intensity. The charming pastoral mask remained firmly in place, but underneath it, I could see the cold, ruthless calculation of a man closing a deal. He was banking entirely on my public submission. Maya has always been the silent engine of this charity, he declared, speaking directly into the microphone while looking straight into my eyes. She works tirelessly behind the scenes, never asking for recognition. But today she steps into the light. Today she is making a sacrifice that will cement our legacy in this city forever. He signaled to one of the junior deacons standing near the edge of the stage. The young man quickly stepped forward, carrying a thick, pristine leather binder. He handed it to Terrence with a respectful bow and scurried back to his post. Terrence held the binder up for the entire congregation to see, presenting it like a sacred text. Inside this binder is the closing authorization for our very first property, he announced, the excitement in his voice reaching a fever pitch. But this property is not being funded by your weekly tithes or our general charity donations. My beautiful wife has decided to personally fund this entire acquisition. She is releasing $150,000 from her late father's private trust to ensure this community has the resources it desperately needs. The pavilion exploded. People were cheering, whistling, and crying. The applause was absolutely deafening. I looked out into the crowd and saw Tasha practically vibrating with excitement, her hands clasped together in greedy anticipation. Brenda was wiping fake tears from her cheeks, while Dominique continued filming, securing footage of their impending payday. They had me surrounded. They had engineered a scenario where backing out would look like a massive public betrayal of the church and the community. Terrence unclasped the heavy brass latch and flipped the binder open, revealing the dense legal paperwork inside. He pulled a heavy gold fountain pen from the breast pocket of his tailored suit. It was the exact pen I had gifted him when he first launched the charity. The symbolism was sickening. He pressed the open binder into my hands, the heavy weight of the paper resting against my palms. He uncapped the gold pen and held it out to me, his fingers brushing against mine. The microphone was positioned perfectly to pick up his next words, amplifying them across the entire manicured lawn. The crowd fell completely silent, hanging on the dramatic weight of the moment. Hundreds of eyes were burning into me, waiting for the triumphant signature that would launch their beloved charitable housing program. Terrence leaned in close, his lips brushing against my ear. "Sign it, baby," he whispered, his voice a smooth, coercive purr, perfectly amplified for the eager audience to hear. "Do it for the community. Do it for our legacy. Show them how much you love us." He pulled back slightly, leaving the gold pen suspended in the space between us. He was daring me to ruin his glorious moment. He was utilizing the immense social pressure of our entire congregation, the church elders, and our extended family to force my hand. He firmly believed I would blindly sign the authorization, rather than risk a public, humiliating confrontation. He thought the heavy, suffocating weight of all those expectant, staring faces would crush my willpower and secure his stolen future. He smiled, that perfect, untouchable smile, absolutely certain he had won. I looked down at the gold pen, then out at the waiting faces, letting my eyes lock onto Tasha in the front row. The silence was abruptly shattered by the sound of Terrence choking on his own breath. He stumbled backward, a frantic, disjointed movement that betrayed his crumbling composure. He reached for the microphone I held, but I smoothly stepped out of his grasp, maintaining my position at the front of the stage. He let out a harsh, jagged laugh that echoed unnaturally over the speaker system. It was a desperate, pathetic sound. He looked frantically at the church elders and then out to the bewildered congregation, throwing his hands up in a gesture of exaggerated bewilderment. "Maya is just making a silly joke," he stammered, his voice pitching an octave higher than its usual smooth baritone. "She has a very dry sense of humor, folks. My beautiful wife is just overwhelmed by the heat and the excitement of this glorious day." He forced another brittle laugh, wiping the profusely beading sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "Let us just take a step back and appreciate her dramatic flair for keeping us all on our toes." No one in the audience laughed with him. The elders sat frozen, their expressions shifting from shock to deep, furious suspicion. The congregation remained entirely silent, watching the pastor scramble to patch the gaping hole in his pristine facade. Terrence looked toward the VIP section, his eyes silently begging his family for a lifeline. Brenda immediately sprang into action. The gray hue of shock on her face was instantly replaced by an ugly mottled red flush of defensive rage. She stood up so violently that her folding chair toppled over backward onto the grass with a sharp clatter. She marched toward the front of the stage, pointing a trembling manicured finger directly at my chest. "She is having a mental breakdown," Brenda yelled, her voice shrill and echoing without the need for a microphone. "My daughter-in-law has been under tremendous pressure at her corporate job, and she has completely lost her mind. She is not well. She needs serious psychiatric help, not an audience. Terrence needs to get her to a hospital immediately." Brenda turned to the congregation, waving her arms frantically, trying to redirect their attention. "Please, everyone, return to your meals. Ignore this tragic display of mental illness. We ask for your prayers for Maya during this deeply troubling time. She needs the Lord and medical intervention." Dominique quickly chimed in, sensing the desperate need to spin the narrative. "Yes, she is totally delusional," Dominique shouted over the crowd, grabbing the arm of a nearby deacon. "She has been acting erratic all week long. She is making up these crazy lies because she is having a psychotic episode. Get her off that stage before she embarrasses herself any further." I did not argue. I did not raise my voice to defend my sanity. Arguing with narcissists and thieves only feeds their desperate need for chaotic distraction. I let Brenda and Dominique yell their frantic lies into the humid afternoon air. I simply reached down into my leather handbag resting by my feet and pulled out my digital tablet. It was already powered on and fully synced to the specific network I needed. The massive white projection screen positioned directly behind Terrence had been displaying the Community Uplift charity logo all afternoon, glowing brightly against the shaded backdrop of the main tent. I did not even look at Terrence as I tapped the screen of my tablet. With one single precise keystroke, I bypassed the local security and instantly overrode the Bluetooth projector. The giant charity logo vanished, blinking out into absolute blackness. The sudden change in lighting drew every single eye away from Brenda and straight toward the massive screen behind the stage. Terrence whipped his head around, his eyes widening in pure, unadulterated panic, as he realized exactly what I had just taken control of. Up flashed the bright, harsh interface of a text messaging application, magnified to 20 feet tall for the entire community to read. It was not a fake document or a blurry photograph. It was high-definition, undeniable digital proof. The header at the top of the massive screen proudly displayed the name of the group chat: The Real Family. The congregation leaned forward collectively, squinting at the giant glowing text bubbles. I scrolled smoothly down the tablet screen, bringing the most damning exchanges right into the center of the display. The first set of messages belonged to Dominique. The timestamp showed they were sent during the Sunday service just 3 weeks ago. The congregation read Dominique's words in utter silence. "I cannot believe these sheep are still giving us their money," she had texted, followed by a string of laughing emojis. "Terrence is up there selling them a dream, and they are just emptying their wallets. I just bought the new Cartier bracelet with the youth fund money. Praise the Lord for gullible believers." A fresh wave of horrified gasps washed over the lawn. I saw the lead elder, a stern man named Brother Washington, stand up slowly from his front row seat. His hands were shaking, his jaw set in a tight line of furious betrayal. He stared at the screen, reading the words of the pastor's sister, mocking the very faith and generosity of the people she claimed to serve. Dominique physically shrank, covering her mouth with both hands. The arrogant entitlement she had worn all afternoon evaporated, leaving behind a terrified, trembling shell. But I was not finished. I swiped the tablet screen, bringing up the next exchange. This one featured Brenda coordinating logistics. The timestamp was from a Tuesday afternoon. The text bubbles glowed a bright, damning blue against the white background. "Terrence, I booked the executive suite at the Four Seasons for you and Tasha," Brenda had written. "I used the discretionary charity account, so Maya will not see the charge on your personal cards. Tell Tasha to use the back entrance. I will make sure Maya stays busy reviewing those useless spreadsheets. Have fun, my golden boy." The silence on the lawn was absolute and terrifying. The visual proof of a mother actively arranging a hotel room for her son's mistress, using embezzled charity funds, and bragging about deceiving his wife was too grotesque to comprehend. People turned to look at Brenda with undisguised revulsion. The woman who had just minutes ago lectured me about traditional family values and female submission was now publicly exposed as the architect of her own son's infidelity. Brenda staggered backward, clutching her chest, as if she could physically block the judgment raining down upon her. She looked frantically for an exit, but the crowd had organically shifted, forming a tight, impenetrable wall of angry, betrayed parishioners. Terrence was hyperventilating, his chest heaving as he stared at the giant screen. "Maya, please," he begged, his voice dropping to a desperate, pathetic whisper meant only for me. "Please stop. You are destroying everything. We can fix this. I will end it with Tasha. I will put the money back. Just turn the screen off. I beg of you." I looked at the man I had loved for 4 years, the man I had supported and elevated. He was not a spiritual leader or a visionary. He was a cowardly thief begging for mercy he absolutely did not deserve. I offered him a cold, flat stare and swiped my finger across the tablet screen one final time. The text messages vanished, replaced by the stark, unforgiving lines of a master financial spreadsheet. This was my domain. The ghost payroll ledger illuminated the tent, exposing the rotten core of the Community Uplift charity. The columns were meticulously organized, highlighting names, dates, and federal bank routing numbers. I highlighted the specific rows belonging to Brenda and Dominique. The elders of the church walked closer to the stage, their eyes scanning the massive digital ledger. They watched in real time as the numbers told the undeniable truth. They saw the fraudulent $6,000 checks issued every single month to Brenda under the guise of an executive consulting fee. They saw the phantom administrative salary paid to Dominique for a position that did not legally exist. They tracked the columns, visualizing the exact flow of the money. The funds they had personally donated, the federal grants I had secured for inner-city youth programs, were going straight into Brenda and Dominique's designer handbags. Brother Washington turned to face Terrence, his voice shaking with righteous fury. "You stole from us," he bellowed, pointing a trembling finger at the stage. "You stole from the children in this community to fund your mistresses and your mother's luxury lifestyle. You are a disgrace to this pulpit and a disgrace to God." Terrence backed away from the elder, his hands raised in surrender. "Brother Washington, let me explain," he stammered, his charismatic voice completely broken. "It is a misunderstanding. The funds were reallocated for administrative purposes. We were going to invest it back into the church." No one believed a single word. The evidence was towering above them, glowing in high definition, undeniable and absolute. The community leaders who had championed Terrence, the politicians who had posed for photos with him, they were all backing away, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the exposed fraudster. Tasha realized the severity of the situation. The luxury love nest was gone. The wealthy pastor was exposed as a broke embezzler facing federal charges. She dropped her plastic cup of fruit punch and turned to flee, pushing aggressively through the crowd of stunned parishioners. She did not look back. She abandoned Terrence the exact same way she would abandon a sinking ship. I stood on the stage, holding the microphone and the tablet, the master of the digital guillotine. I had not yelled. I had not cried. I had simply turned on the lights and let the cockroaches scatter. I looked down at Brenda, who was weeping genuinely, now her reputation in the community permanently destroyed. I looked at Dominique, frantically tapping on her phone, likely trying to delete evidence that I had already downloaded and forwarded to the state attorney general. And finally, I looked at Terrence. He was standing alone on his magnificent stage, stripped of his power, his money, and his fake legacy. He was looking at me with pure, terrified comprehension. He finally realized that the woman he thought was a clueless spreadsheet drone was actually the architect of his total annihilation. The absolute silence hanging over the pavilion finally shattered, fracturing into 1,000 pieces of pure, unadulterated chaos. The shock wore off, and the reality of the stolen funds ignited a firestorm of righteous anger across the church lawn. Parishioners who had trusted Terrence with their spiritual guidance and their hard-earned money began shouting, demanding answers. The gentle jazz music that had previously set the mood was now replaced by a cacophony of betrayal and outrage. The facade of the perfect pastoral family was entirely obliterated. Brenda, unable to process her sudden public disgrace, panicked. She saw the massive screen still illuminating her fraudulent $6,000 monthly consulting fees and decided her only option was to literally pull the plug. She scrambled up from the grass, her face a mask of desperate fury, and lunged toward the heavy audiovisual equipment cart positioned beside the main stage. "Stop looking at that!" she shrieked wildly, waving her arms at the congregation as she charged forward. "It is all fake. It is a digital manipulation." She reached frantically for the thick bundle of black cables snaking up the side of the stage platform, but in her blind haste she completely failed to notice the heavy-duty orange extension cord coiled directly in her path. Brenda's expensive designer heel caught the thick rubber cord. Her forward momentum betrayed her, sending her pitching violently forward. She let out a sharp, undignified yelp as she fell hard onto the damp grass. The massive lavender hat adorned with intricate feathers and pearls that she had worn like a crown of superiority collided forcefully with the side of a metal speaker stand. The impact crushed the expensive headpiece, driving it down over her eyes and snapping the delicate feathers in half. She landed in a tangled heap of tailored fabric, and broken pride, her dignity entirely shattered. No one rushed forward to help her up. The church elders, who had always treated her with the utmost respect, simply watched her struggle in the dirt, their expressions locked in stony disgust. They recognized her true nature now. The illusion of the elegant, pious mother was forever broken, replaced by the pathetic reality of a greedy conspirator wallowing in the mud of her own making. Dominique, witnessing her mother's spectacular fall and feeling the collective wrath of the community closing in, decided self-preservation was her only viable strategy. She clutched her designer handbag, the one purchased with stolen youth outreach funds, tightly to her chest and turned toward the back parking lot. She lowered her head, trying to make herself small, hoping to slip away unnoticed in the ensuing pandemonium. But the congregation was not about to let one of their primary thieves simply walk away. A tight human barricade of furious parishioners swiftly formed, blocking her only escape route. Brother Washington, standing at the center of the human wall, crossed his arms over his chest. His eyes burned with an intensity that made Dominique physically recoil. "Where exactly do you think you are going, Dominique?" he demanded, his voice booming with absolute unyielding authority. "You have a massive amount of explaining to do about your phantom administrative salary before you go anywhere." The crowd surged forward, pressing in closely around her. Elderly women who had previously baked casseroles for Dominique's birthday were now glaring at her, demanding to know where their weekly tithes had gone. Young couples who had struggled to donate to the Transitional Housing Fund shouted pointed questions about her heavy Cartier bracelets. Dominique backed up, her eyes darting wildly like a trapped animal. She raised her hands in a futile gesture of defense. "You have to believe me," she stammered, her voice trembling with intense panic. "Terrence handled all the money. I just signed what he told me to sign. I did not know the funds were being stolen." It was a pathetic attempt at gaslighting, a desperate lie thrown against the wall of digital evidence still glowing brightly behind the stage. A woman in the front row pointed directly at the giant projection screen. "We just read your text messages, Dominique," she yelled. "We saw you laughing at us, calling us sheep. You knew exactly where the money came from, and you spent it anyway." Dominique opened her mouth to argue, but the words completely died in her throat. She was completely surrounded, cut off from her luxury vehicle, and trapped in the harsh, unforgiving light of her own exposed greed. Up on the stage, Terrence realized his charm offensive had completely failed. His family was cornered, his mistress had fled, and his congregation was actively turning into an angry mob. The sociopathic confidence that had fueled his entire career was rapidly evaporating. He looked out at the furious faces staring up at him and recognized that logic and denial would no longer serve him. He needed to pivot immediately. He needed to deploy his ultimate weapon, the weapon of spiritual manipulation. Terrence dramatically dropped to his knees right in the center of the wooden platform. He clasped his hands tightly together, raising his face toward the roof of the white catering tent. He squeezed his eyes shut, forcing a stream of manufactured tears to roll down his cheeks. He began to weep loudly, a theatrical display of brokenness designed to trigger the ingrained forgiveness of his flock. "Lord, forgive me," he wailed, his voice cracking with artificial agony. "Forgive your humble servant. The devil has entered this holy place today. The enemy has created these terrible digital illusions to tear apart our beautiful community and destroy my holy family." He threw his arms wide open, rocking back on his heels. "I am under spiritual attack," he bellowed, projecting his voice over the angry shouts of the crowd. "The devil is using my own wife to strike me down. Please, church family, join me in prayer. Let us cast out these wicked lies and heal our fractured flock. Let us reject the devil's illusions and remember the love we share." It was a masterclass in desperate gaslighting. He was attempting to weaponize their deep religious convictions, transforming his documented financial crimes into a mystical spiritual battle. He hoped that by playing the persecuted martyr, he could bypass their logic and appeal directly to their faith. But the congregation was no longer under his spell. The illusion had been thoroughly shattered the exact moment the ghost payroll hit the giant screen. They did not bow their heads in prayer. They did not shout amen. They just stood there watching a grown man put on a pathetic, humiliating performance. I stood completely still, looking down at the man kneeling on the wooden planks. I felt absolutely no pity, no residual affection, and no anger. He was merely a pathetic, predictable fraud, desperately trying to manipulate his way out of a cold steel trap. The crowd slowly quieted down, holding their collective breath and waiting to see exactly how I would respond to his spectacular display of fake religious agony. The elders watched me with profound respect, recognizing the undeniable power of the financial truth I possessed. I looked at Terrence's sweat-soaked face, his eyes wide with fake pious terror. He was still holding his hands up toward the sky, continuing to mutter meaningless prayers for deliverance, hoping his performance would magically wipe away the mountain of federal evidence. It was truly embarrassing to watch a man who had commanded so much unearned authority reduce himself to a whimpering mess on the floor. He sobbed into his hands, violently shaking his shoulders in a calculated rhythm to convey ultimate repentance. He genuinely believed that if he cried loud enough and invoked the name of the devil enough times, the loyal parishioners would simply forget the stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars. He thought he could gaslight an entire congregation into believing that irrefutable bank statements and text messages were simply demonic trickery. It was the absolute peak of sociopathic arrogance, and it was failing spectacularly right before my eyes. The people standing on the lawn were not foolish sheep. They were hardworking, honest citizens who had been ruthlessly exploited, and they were entirely immune to his toxic tears. I held the microphone, bringing it back up to my lips. My posture remained flawlessly straight, projecting nothing but unyielding strength and forensic certainty. I did not need to scream or cry to destroy him. The data had already done all the heavy lifting. I took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the profound weight of my silence press down on his crumbling ego. The surrounding church members leaned in closer, eager to witness the final shattering of his grand deception. My voice cut effortlessly through the humid afternoon air, slicing straight through the center of his loud, theatrical weeping. "The devil did not forge those bank statements," Terrence Worth stated, my words ringing with cold, absolute finality across the stunned pavilion. "You did." The finality of my words pinned Terrence to the wooden planks of his stage. His theatrical sobs ceased instantly, replaced by a sharp, ragged intake of breath. He stared up at me, his dark eyes wide and bloodshot, the complete realization of his total defeat finally sinking into his calculating brain. There was no charm left to deploy, and no spiritual manipulation left to wield. He was just a cornered criminal staring at the architect of his demise. A faint wail rapidly grew louder. The wailing of approaching sirens sliced through the warm afternoon air, multiplying and converging on the main entrance of the community pavilion. The congregation collectively turned their heads, tracking the incoming noise. Terrence scrambled backward on his hands and knees, his expensive tailored suit collecting dust and grass stains. He looked wildly toward the gates, his chest heaving with sheer animal panic. A fleet of vehicles abruptly swerved into the church parking lot, their flashing red and blue lights painting the pristine white catering tents with harsh strobing colors. 3 police cruisers boxed in the main exit, followed by 2 unmarked SUVs. The car doors slammed shut in rapid succession. The crowd instinctively parted, creating a wide, clear path. Striding down that newly formed path was David, my brilliant corporate attorney. He wore a perfectly tailored suit, carrying a thick briefcase. He did not look at the stunned church elders or the murmuring crowd. His gaze was locked squarely on the stage. Flanking him on either side were 2 federal agents wearing dark windbreakers with the bright yellow letters IRS printed boldly across their backs. Close behind marched 4 police officers, their hands resting on their duty belts. The manicured grounds were being occupied by a coordinated federal task force. The parishioners murmured in shock, pulling their children close and stepping back to give the authorities plenty of room. David reached the base of the platform and offered me a brief nod. We had planned this exact sequence of events down to the minute timing the arrival of law enforcement to perfectly coincide with his grand, bold public stage announcement. Terrence scrambled to his feet, his eyes darting, looking for a way out. He stumbled toward the back of the stage, but two police officers quickly jogged up the wooden stairs, cutting off his only route of escape. David stepped forward, holding up a thick stack of official warrants. "Terrence, you are completely out of options," David announced, his voice carrying a crisp, authoritative edge that brooked zero argument. "We have spent the last 3 months compiling a mountain of irrefutable, solid evidence." One of the local police officers stepped squarely in front of Terrence, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "Terrence Williams, you are under arrest," the officer stated, his voice booming across the silent pavilion. He grabbed Terrence by the arm, spinning him around. "You are being charged with multiple counts of federal wire fraud, embezzlement, and grand larceny. You have the right to remain silent." Terrence physically resisted for a brief, futile second, pulling his arm away. "Maya, tell them to stop," he screamed, his voice cracking with pure desperation. "Tell them this is a mistake. I am a man of God. You cannot do this to me in front of my congregation. It will destroy the church. Please, Maya, I am begging you. Do not let them take me away like this." I stood perfectly still, watching the steel cuffs click securely around his wrists. He looked incredibly small, stripped of his booming pastoral authority. "I am not doing anything to you, Terrence," I replied, my voice devoid of any pity or hesitation. "I handed the authorities the exact same spreadsheets you thought I was too stupid to understand. You destroyed yourself the minute you decided to steal from the vulnerable, innocent people who completely trusted you." The police officers marched him toward the edge of the stage. The congregation watched as their beloved pastor was paraded past them in handcuffs. The church elders turned their backs in disgust, refusing to look at him. Terrence hung his head, sobbing genuinely now. The tears of a man who realized his entire kingdom had just violently collapsed into dust. They guided him down the center aisle, the flashing lights of the cruisers waiting to swallow him whole. With Terrence secured in the cruiser, David turned his focus toward the VIP section. Brenda and Dominique were still trapped in the center of the crowd, completely surrounded by angry parishioners demanding accountability. Brenda was attempting to straighten her ruined lavender hat, her hands trembling violently. Dominique was aggressively clutching her designer handbag, her eyes wide with terror as she watched her brother being driven away. David signaled to the two federal IRS agents. They moved with swift, intimidating purpose, slicing through the crowd directly toward the two women. The parishioners stepped aside, eager to watch the final act. The taller agent, a stern woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, pulled two thick manila envelopes from her jacket. "Brenda Williams and Dominique Williams," the agent announced, her voice echoing sharply across the grass. "I am Special Agent Miller with the Internal Revenue Service. We are serving you both with official notices of comprehensive financial audits and immediate asset forfeiture." Brenda let out a loud gasp, clutching her chest. "You have no right to speak to me," she yelled, her face flushing a deep, angry red. "I am a respected elder in this community. I have done absolutely nothing wrong. My son is the pastor of this church, and you are violating our religious freedom." Agent Miller completely ignored the entitled outburst. She handed the first envelope directly to Brenda. "We have fully traced the fraudulent consulting fees routed from the Community Uplift charity directly into your personal bank accounts." Agent Miller stated, her tone cold and factual. "You are deeply implicated in a massive ghost payroll scheme. Effective immediately, all of your bank accounts, investment portfolios, and retirement funds have been completely frozen by federal order." Brenda swayed on her feet, the color draining rapidly from her face. Frozen, she shrieked, her voice pitching into a hysterical squeal. "You cannot freeze my accounts. I have bills to pay. I have a lifestyle to maintain. You are stealing my money." "It was never your money, Brenda," I interjected, stepping down from the stage and walking slowly toward the VIP section. "It was donation money meant for struggling families and inner-city youth programs. You bought luxury hotel rooms for your son's mistress, using funds meant to buy warm coats for children. You deserve absolutely nothing." The second IRS agent turned his attention to Dominique, who was aggressively backing away. He stepped firmly into her path, blocking her escape. Ms. Williams, we are also seizing assets purchased with embezzled federal funds, the agent declared. He pointed directly at the luxury leather handbag she was clutching so desperately. Hand over the bag and the keys to the vehicle you drove here today. Dominique clutched the expensive leather tighter to her chest, her eyes blazing with furious entitlement. No, she screamed, stomping her foot on the grass. This is my property. I bought this bag. You cannot just take my things. I know my rights. I will sue every single one of you for harassment. You bought that bag using a phantom administrative salary for a job you never actually performed, David interjected, stepping forward to stand beside the federal agents. Every single diamond bracelet, designer purse, and luxury car payment has been meticulously traced back to the charity's accounts. Hand over the assets, Dominique, or you will be joining your brother in handcuffs for obstruction of justice. Two local police officers stepped up behind the IRS agents, resting their hands meaningfully on their belts. The visual threat was undeniable. Dominique looked at the officers, then at the furious faces of the church members surrounding her. She let out a loud, frustrated scream of pure rage, a sound of absolute entitled defeat. She violently threw the expensive designer handbag onto the grass and roughly dug the car keys out of her pocket, tossing them hard at the agent's chest. Brenda was sobbing uncontrollably now, sinking down into her overturned folding chair. My reputation is ruined, she wailed, burying her face in her hands. My beautiful family is destroyed. We have nothing left. We are completely ruined. I stood very tall, watching the two women who had mocked me, belittled me, and actively conspired to steal my inheritance reduced to nothing. They had built their entire identity on stolen money and unearned arrogance. Now they were facing massive federal audits, frozen bank accounts, and complete social exile. The congregation watched them with zero sympathy, their earlier adoration replaced by profound, unrelenting disgust. The legal and financial hammer had fallen with absolute devastating precision. There was absolutely no mercy left to give, and no illusions left to hide behind. The chaos of the arrests and the federal seizures consumed the central pavilion, drawing the complete attention of every single person remaining on the church grounds. I turned my back on the pathetic, sobbing mess that Brenda and Dominique had become. My peripheral vision caught a flash of crimson silk darting behind the massive white catering tent. Tasha was attempting a silent, cowardly escape. She was creeping frantically toward the rear service gate, her expensive designer heels sinking into the soft mud near the drainage ditch. She thought she had successfully slipped through the cracks of this disaster. I moved with unhurried, predatory grace, intercepting her just as her trembling fingers reached for the heavy iron latch of the back gate. I stepped directly into her path, crossing my arms over my chest and blocking her only exit. Tasha physically recoiled, letting out a sharp gasp. Her beautiful face was streaked with running mascara and sweat. The arrogant, invincible aura she had weaponized all afternoon was completely gone. She looked like a terrified child caught stealing from a candy store. "Move, Maya!" She hissed, her voice a desperate, pathetic whisper. "I have absolutely nothing to do with this. Terrence lied to me too. I am just another victim of his manipulation. Let me out of here right now." I did not move a single inch. I looked at her completely devoid of pity, anger, or tears. "You are not a victim, Tasha," I stated, my voice radiating absolute Arctic calm. "You are a willing participant in a massive federal fraud scheme, and your profound stupidity is honestly breathtaking." Tasha glared at me, attempting to summon a final shred of her former arrogance. "You are just a bitter, jealous wife," she spat, stepping closer. "You think you won because he got arrested, but I still have that Bellevue townhouse. He signed the paperwork for me yesterday. I still get the ultimate prize." A genuine smile spread across my face. I tilted my head, studying her complete detachment from reality. "By the way, I canceled the closing on that house 3 days ago. I delivered the final devastating blow, watching the remaining color rapidly drain from her cheeks. The property remains firmly in the possession of the original owners. There is no luxury love nest waiting for you." Tasha opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. She shook her head in frantic denial. "You cannot do that," she finally stammered. "Terrence used his credit cards to secure the earnest money. He promised me." "And those platinum credit cards in Terrence's name?" I continued, my tone brutally relentless. "I canceled those too. I reported them stolen immediately after discovering the unauthorized phantom transactions." "You are holding a completely empty bag, Tasha. Good luck paying off that $3,000 silk wrap dress with absolutely no job." Tasha frowned, her chest heaving with panicked breaths. "What do you mean, no job?" she demanded. "I am a senior marketing director." "Not anymore," I replied, my voice echoing with absolute finality. "Because I also sent the entire digital file containing your explicit text messages, hotel receipts, and the detailed embezzlement proof directly to your corporate human resources department this morning. They are extremely interested in how you utilized company time and resources to facilitate federal wire fraud." The words struck her with the physical force of a wrecking ball. The reality of her total destruction finally penetrated her thick wall of denial. Tasha's knees buckled beneath her. She let out a guttural sound of pure despair and crumpled directly onto the damp, muddy grass. The luxurious crimson silk dress she had flaunted so proudly absorbed the dirty brown water, completely ruining the expensive fabric. She pulled her knees to her chest, sobbing uncontrollably into her hands. I did not offer her a tissue or a single word of comfort. I simply turned around and walked away, leaving her sobbing in the mud exactly where she belonged. 6 months later, the sprawling radioactive fallout of the Community Uplift charity scandal had permanently reshaped the entire city. The local news stations relentlessly covered every single dramatic detail of the federal trial, broadcasting the sheer magnitude of the financial deception. Terrence pleaded guilty to multiple felony counts of wire fraud and massive corporate embezzlement. The judge showed zero leniency, swiftly handing down a brutal 10-year sentence in a maximum security federal penitentiary. The charismatic, untouchable pastor was now just another assigned inmate number, locked inside a concrete cell completely stripped of his tailored suits and his adoring congregation. Brenda and Dominique suffered an equally devastating fate. The ferocious IRS agents systematically dismantled their entire fraudulent lifestyle. The government immediately seized their sprawling suburban home, auctioning it off to recover the stolen charity funds. They lost their luxury vehicles, their designer wardrobes, and their heavy gold jewelry. The community they had once ruled with absolute arrogance entirely shunned them. They were forced to move into a tiny, cramped apartment on the outskirts of the city, living in complete social exile. Former church members crossed the street to avoid them, refusing to acknowledge their existence. They were permanent outcasts trapped in a terrifying prison of their own making. I did not just survive their brutal betrayal. I mathematically calculated their boundless greed, banked heavily on their sheer, unadulterated stupidity, and decisively won the entire war. The sun began to slowly set, casting a brilliant golden glow over the magnificent city skyline. I stood radiant and absolutely thriving on the expansive private balcony of my brand new luxury penthouse. The evening breeze was perfectly cool and refreshing. I held a delicate crystal glass of remarkably expensive vintage wine, raising it slightly in a silent, triumphant toast to my newfound freedom. The city lights sparkled brightly below me, reflecting the immense, boundless power of a woman who completely reclaimed her life. I took a slow, highly satisfying sip of the rich, dark wine, savoring the absolute pristine taste of my ultimate victory.